Welcome everybody to the Cornerstone of America podcast. I am your host, Alex Jowdy, and I am fortunately, honored actually to be joined by Brian Andrews and Jeffrey Wilson, the co-author group. And what I like to do usually is, instead of me, mucking up the the intros, is giving you guys a chance to, talk a little bit about your backgrounds. You guys both have extensive backgrounds, so Jeff, since you booted Brian off before, let's give Brian a first shot.
All right. Well, I'm Jeff Wilson. Obviously, I'm a Navy veteran. Did a variety of things in the Navy, and started out in aviation. Got in an accident. Did some other things. Worked in other parts of the federal government for a while, but eventually, I sort of left that kind of life, thinking, I'm going to do something that is a life of peace. So I went to medical school and decided I was going to be an academic surgeon. I was going to be a teaching vascular surgeon at a big university. And I was got into a residency and fellowship that put me on that track and was close to finishing when those jackasses crashed the planes into the towers in the Pentagon. And it just pissed me off. So I went back into the Navy and deployed with the Marines as a FRIS surgeon. And while I was there, I ran into some people that I knew from a previous life downrange. And the next thing I knew, I was working at a special warfare unit on the East Coast and deploying with them. So I spent the next 4 or 5 years doing that. And once I left the Navy, I continued to do some task force kind of things for a while. But writing was always my passion. Been writing since I was a little kid. I mean, I've been a pilot. I've done all these other crazy things. But writing since I was like 10, always that thread of writing. So when I met Brian, I was already writing and had a couple books out, as did he. And we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But we met up and decided to pool our efforts, figuring maybe between the two of us, if we combined us, we'd be one good writer. So that's what we did.
Yeah, your background is really interesting. When I read up on it after you talked the first time on Twitter of all places.
Right.
I'm sitting there reading your bio. I'm like, man, dude, this is like 7, 8, 9, 10 lives, man.
Well, that's how you know I'm a good fiction writer. Just read my bio.
There you go. Brian, how about yourself, man?
Yeah, like Jeff, I'm a Navy veteran as well. I joined the submarine community. I was an ROTC guy. So after studying psychology at Vanderbilt, I sort of did a big U-turn and went submarines. So went into the nuclear Navy, did one tour on a fast attack submarine in the Pacific. And then after that, was interested in, from my time in the Navy, just got very interested in leadership and sort of caught the entrepreneurship bug too. So finished my tour and then went to business school, joined a really interesting program called the Park Leadership Fellows Program, where you're sort of thrust in with, I think my class was maybe 25 of us, all from different backgrounds and experiences. There was there were only 2 military guys. I was a Navy guy, and then they had 1 Army guy. And then the rest were just people from all walks of life, different ages, different backgrounds from industry. And you're just sort of thrust into this, to learn best practices and sort of take your leadership skills to the next level. And then when I left business school, went back to where I grew up in the Midwest and started a business and did that. But sort of like Jeff was saying, always interested in storytelling, always in the back of my mind, always dabbling with, this idea that, I had some stories in me that I wanted to get out and wanted to entertain. And so was doing that on the side. And then when that first book got picked up, it really became a passion. And now, fortunate enough, I met Jeff and I'm able to do this full time.
So, Alex, I want to throw something out here because some of your listeners are going, wait a minute, what? I must have heard him wrong. You did not hear him wrong. A guy with a bachelor's in psychology who eventually got a master's in business was in the nuclear Navy on board a nuclear submarine. And that is its own story you probably don't have time for. But just imagine having a psychology degree and having the audacity to tell your detailer, yes, I know I'm not an engineer, but I definitely think I could be an officer on a 680. And after the laughter died down, right? Saying, no, I'm serious. So that's I got to brag on Brian because I think that's one of the most impressive things I've ever heard in my life. That a dude would have that audacity to just, I'm going to do what all the engineers do. I don't need that silly degree or class.
Right, because what do you do with a psychology degree if you're not going to be a psychologist? So,
right.
Yeah, in your background, man, I'm sitting there going, okay, let's see here, U.S. Navy veteran. Okay, that's cool. Nuclear engineers. Okay, on a sub, right? And then Park Leadership Fellow, master's degree from Cornell. And I'm going on, I'm like, psych degree from I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, dude, I feel like a freaking slug, dude.
He's the smarty pants. He brings all the smarts to the books. That's his role. Well, that's really, you asked earlier, what does he do? How does it work? Like, how do we write together? That's how we do it. He is a smart guy that I just ask smart questions, dumb questions to, and he tells me what to do. That's how it works.
So if he's the book smart, are you the street smart one? Is that how it works?
Well, I'm the no smart one. That's my.
So a question I got for both of you guys. Obviously, you know, both of you guys wrote books individually, and then you met up, and I want to get into that a little bit later. But obviously, the military background. Were you guys drawn to going in the military when you were? Did you know you were going to go in when you were kids, or was that something that kind of transitioned as you were going into high school, or how did it work for both of you guys?
I can tell you, for me, I can tell you, I come from a family of service. My dad was in the service. I have an uncle that was a Marine. And as a young man, we were taught that, you give back, you serve. I wasn't pressured to go into the military. In fact, I can't remember my dad ever bringing up to me, oh, you should go into the military.
Right.
Well, my dad was a fighter pilot, and, then he spent the rest of his life in the airlines and was very successful. And he used to just tell me, do something that you love, trick the world into giving you a job where they pay you to do something you would pay to do. Right. And
right.
I've started, which is why I've had 9 careers, I guess. But so I think that for me, there was that service kind of thing. It was kind of weird for me. I started out as a firefighter paramedic, sort of serving in my community. And I really liked how that felt. There's that feeling of serving and giving back has always been hugely motivational for me. And later, when I decided that I wanted to fly, I decided I wanted to be a military pilot for the same reason. It's about service. Flying is fun. And I was already a pilot. My dad taught me to fly when I was little, but it was like, flying is fun, but you should do something productive and useful with it. And so that's why I chose that. And when I got in a motorcycle accident and didn't complete that, I went on to fly in the civilian world, and it was very ungratifying, which is how I wound up in this other part of the government, was because it's like, I love flying. I love being up there, but making sure these guys get to their golf game on time and the coffee's on board and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not mocking it. But I'm just saying, for me personally, there wasn't that sense of I'm leaving the world a little better than when I found it this morning. And so that's, I think, why I got drawn back into military and government service. So it's my dad, I guess, just taught me to have a servant's heart, I guess.
Was that like charter flights, like private flights that you were doing when you were?
I did all kinds of weird stuff. I worked with a government agency looking for pot fields and doing aerial mapping. I did power line patrols. Eventually, I was a corporate pilot. I worked for a coal company in Richmond, and flew their guys around. And they were great guys. Don't get me wrong. They weren't like these entitled. They were like good old boys. And we had a great time. But by and large, the world was not better because they made it to their golf game. Right. It was better for them, I suppose.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I didn't come from a family with a military service history, so mine's a little less inspirational. It's simply that I remember having this conversation with my dad. I had done the college tour thing. We had visited a whole bunch of schools, and I had done, you apply to your different levels. You have your stretch schools, and then you have your medium schools, and then you have your safety schools. And I remember when I got accepted into Vanderbilt, I was so excited, and my dad was excited too, but he had this strange look on his face. And I remember, I was saying, well, this is where I'm going to go. And he said, really? I said, yeah. He's like, well, how are you going to pay for that? I said, well, I'm not paying for it. You're going to pay for it. He's like, no. He said, I saved enough money to pay for you to go to state school, and if you want to go somewhere else, you have to figure out a way to fund the difference. And that was a great wake up call for me. Like a little bit of a bucket of cold water in the face of the 17-year-old. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I got to get my act together. So I did the senior year scramble to figure out, well, how do I do this? And looked at lots of different scholarships. And then a friend of mine in high school said, you should think about ROTC. And we didn't have a high school ROTC program. I didn't know much about it. But then when I found out about it, I said, oh yeah, this sounds great. Not only do they pay for my school, but then I get to have a job. I get to go be in the military. I get to do cool stuff. Right. So that was sort of how I found my way into military service.
Oh man, that's pretty interesting. It's so with when you got into the schools that you wanted, you had to come up with a difference, right? So was one of the military options, was that something that was kind of always there a little bit with like, how'd you stumble across that whole program?
So what's great about the ROTC program, and this is why I'm a big advocate for anyone who's listening. College, especially since when I went to school, college tuition has been increasing at a rate, double, triple, quadruple sometimes the annual inflation rate. So yes, wage rates are not keeping up with the increase in tuition. So, it's a big national conversation, student loan debt. And you leave college now, and it might take you a lifetime to pay back the debt you've accumulated from your undergraduate degree. Whereas with this ROTC program, you graduate university with no debt, and you have a job as soon as you graduate that's paying you in the top, 60 to 70% of the wage rates in America. And then on top of that, you're being put in charge of assets and personnel that, a 22-year-old never should be put in charge of, So I always said I remember when it hit me the first time, I was on watch, fully qualified officer deck. And I remember thinking, my God, the Louisville was a $6.5 billion submarine, 1986 dollars. And they put me in charge of this thing. Like, the CO's asleep, I'm in charge of this thing, like, as OOD. And, where else in the world can, you take a 24-year-old and put him in charge of a $6.5 billion asset and 100 souls, right? Only in the military.
Yeah, talk about struggling with imposter syndrome. Like, oh shit, what am I doing here? Who gave me this? Who's in charge? That's one thing I love about I love about the military. So I never served, but I have a lot of family and friends that served, currently serve, and my I was born here, but first generation. My mom and dad both immigrated here from the Middle East. So to me, especially knowing where they came from and their upbringings and I'm very I feel very blessed and honored to have been born and raised here. And also sometimes, and I do feel like sometimes I'm a little bit, spoiled with the opportunities that we have. I mean, I'm 40 years old. I've, started my career over, 3 different times, and there's probably no way I've been able to do that if I was in, like 70% of the countries around the world. Just America offers you so many opportunities. And especially now, I was talking to, this guy, Art Campos. He is a former Army Ranger, and he owns a gym out here in Washington. And he just went into law enforcement. And we were talking about how with this lockdown and the perceived limitation on resources, especially because everybody's buying all toilet paper for some reason. But but with this restrictions that are coming into place and what's going on, we're getting a minutia of a glimpse of what the rest of the world, the majority of the rest of the world, lives like on every single day. And this is kind of like a temporary thing for us right now, and you're seeing people reacting in a good way, a lot of good things, and you're seeing a lot of people overreacting and some of the negative things that are coming out. And it's just, it kind of reinforces that process of we're so blessed to be here. And I think it's great that the ROTC program exists because it gives kids an opportunity to give back at a young age. And like you said, it presents you with those opportunities to start getting some responsibilities at a young age and learn leadership roles and go into different programs that you do, like you did.
And the other thing that I'll add to that is that it's a great demonstration of a principle that is under-recognized in our society now, or at least in this generation. And that is that people rise to your expectations. I think, in so many parts of our civilization and our world in America now, we expect very little. Oh, they're so young and they got to have time to mature. And we coddle and baby. And I'm a dad. I'm not entirely against that. But I will tell you that when you expect nothing from people, they give you nothing. When you expect amazing things, like, my oldest son is 20. And I'm thinking, as Brian is talking, I'm like, 4 years from now, he could be the OOD on a $6.5 billion submarine. No. and he's an amazing young man. And he could, I'm sure. But I think that we need to learn as a society that when we put greater expectations on people, that's not a burden. That's an opportunity for them to rise to that occasion and find the greatness in themselves. And that's something the military does better than any other organization in America. We give people that responsibility and we expect great things from them. And 95% of the time, that's exactly what they give us. And then they leave and they're not even 30 years old and they have this life experience, but also this development, this personal development that puts them a decade ahead of their peers that never served. And I'm not saying everyone has to serve or should serve. There's no other avenues to success. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that the rest of society could learn that lesson, that when you put responsibility and expectations on people, most people will rise to that occasion and do great things.
That's a really good point. I've thought about this a lot, especially myself. I have 5 kids. My youngest is 2, my oldest is 11, and I got 3 between. And the concept of some type of mandatory service has kind of come up both through conversations on my podcast and with different people in my social circle and family. And I'm a little bit a little torn on it, but I do think that there should be some type of public service. Like some private schools mandate, like, whatever it is, 100, 120 hours of community service, right? Which is great. But, I think there should be something where whether it's military or Coast Guard or something where, like, in that, or ROTC, right? Where in that high school range, before you graduate high school, you should be putting in, maybe 2 years, or before you're 21, 2 years type of thing, kind of like the Israelis do, like you have to do like 2 years of service, right? Because I think what it does is it gives you that concept of, number one, giving back. You do get something out of it, which is great. You learn a lot of leadership skills, a lot of life applicable skills as well. You come out better for the most part at the end of it. And in a good way, you get a sense of like nationalism, like a good, like that word now, especially with what the media does with Trump, they've made that word like this bad thing. Like nationalism is a bad thing, right? It's like a negative connotation. And I think it's, there's a way to actually show that, like that national pride, right?
When you have mandatory service, what you do for those young people at that young age is, before they get out there into the world, you've instilled in them that there's something bigger than them. Mm-hmm. They are not the center of the universe, that there is, and there's nothing wrong with working hard and making money and getting stuff. That's great. Like, I'm all for that. I'm a capitalist. But when you learn at a young age to serve something greater than yourself, whether it's because of your faith or because of your sense of nationalism or your sense of patriotism or whatever, you will be a better person and you'll be more productive and more successful, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with what both you guys are saying. And my personal experience, like in the park program, was that I encountered lots of folks. Like I said, there were only 2 of us that were veterans, but there were a lot of people that had done Teach for America or Peace Corps or Red Cross, or started their own nonprofit or trailblazed in some other way. And what you find is that if you take away the idea of, okay, well, I was out there on the front lines war fighting and you're doing Peace Corps, you would say maybe at first glance that those things are at opposite ends of the spectrum. But when you start talking about your shared experience, you find out exactly what Jeff just said, which is that ultimately the impact on you as a person and you as a leader is very, very similar, because you were part of an organization that was out there in the world, not sheltered. All these people are traveling abroad. You're meeting people from different cultures with different experiences, and then you're trying to make a difference in the world, right? So how you make the difference in the world, how you serve, is less important than the act of actually serving.
Right. And I think, at least I know for myself, like at that age where work ethic was never an issue. I always felt like if I didn't have two jobs, then I was wasting time, right? And but purpose, right? Like a lack of purpose is big for especially young men like my goal was I was going to play in the NFL, right? I was going to go pro. I played football, and then I blew my knee out between junior and senior year, and then I had a total lack of purpose because there was no backup plan. Not because nobody told me or my parents didn't tell me or anything like that too, but you guys know, especially having kids. When you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old, young man, you're not going to listen to anybody half the time, right? Because you know better, or just out of sheer will, you're like, I don't care, I'm going to prove everybody wrong, which is great to an extent, but there still needs to be that would have been a perfect opportunity for me to kind of jump into some type of program like the ROTC, or have that to fall back on, to have those skills, taught to me at that age versus, just kind of stumbling around for a couple of years and figuring out what you want to do. And I think it's definitely beneficial for you guys. What did you find when you transitioned from the military into civilian life, as far as, becoming entrepreneurs and small business owners? Because, Brian, you talked about it, what was, if you don't mind me asking, what was one of the businesses you had when you were coming out?
Yeah. So one of the things I did is I tried to say, what experiences do I have that I could leverage, so having that nuclear power experience, when you're in the engine room of a submarine, it's basically just a miniature power plant. It has all the components that a full-size power plant has, just smashed inside a tube. So I decided, well, it would make sense to leverage, that power experience. A lot of submariners go into the power industry when they get out. So I started working with a French company that made these water filters. Doesn't sound very glamorous, but it was a great opportunity because they made these water filters that would filter out all the trash and debris from a river or a lake or the ocean that these power plants use for through cooling. So they have to bring in cooling water. And if all that garbage is in the in-process water, it'll clog up the condensers and shut down the power plant.
Right.
So the filtration of this influent water is a little tricky, and this company had a great product. But what was really fun for me is that they didn't have an American presence. They had been doing really well in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, but they just hadn't figured out how to crack the American market nut, so to speak.
Oh, interesting.
And, so my father had a relationship with the owner. I went over to Paris. I met them. I did my sales job of, okay, here's why I think you should let me, open a distributorship and try to penetrate the U.S. market. They said, go ahead, and gave me the time and support to do it. And, 5 years later, we had them in, 60% of the power plants in the United States. So that was really a great experience for me, because it went from trying to say, okay, there's a great product, but there's no infrastructure, there's no branding, there's no marketing, there's no support. And, oh, by the way, French guys don't really relate to the bubbas at, Southern Company, such and such plant down in Alabama. Whereas, having been a guy on a submarine, dealing with problems in the engine room, I could speak the language. I could relate to the guys that, all the problems that they face on a daily basis. So it was a really nice blend to be able to put my business school experience and my military experience and my leadership experience all sort of into one package, and then have the ability to sort of, control the messaging myself. So I feel really blessed that I had that opportunity, and it was a great time.
Yeah, I mean, talk about finding, leveraging opportunity and relationships. I mean, I think that's where a lot of people struggle, that are in positions where either they have a job they don't like or a career that they're not happy with, and they're just doing it because they're going through the motions. And then they don't understand that, especially in today's day and age with the internet, and I mean, crap, man, look what we're doing right now, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, through all this process, right? You can do whatever you want to do. You just have to be willing to put in the work and really focus on kind of building those relationships and utilizing those opportunities that present themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right.
How about you, Jeff?
Well, I'd love to get passed over on this, because my transition wasn't nearly as smooth as Brian's. For me, there was my experience in the military after 9/11 was pretty intense, working with the people that I worked with and the community that I worked with. And I lost a lot of people very close to me. And so for me, I actually had a very difficult time making a real transition. You know, when I separated from the military, I didn't separate from the community, and I continued to work in that environment and continued to do things. There was always that sense of, you know, I'm going to do for those guys that didn't make it, I'm going to do this one more thing. I'm going to do one more trip. I'm going to do one more event, if you will. And I struggled with that actually for a number of years, and bounced around doing contract and consulting work, worked with some other agencies and stuff like that. And it was really hard on my family. And I think that what was the hardest for me was that realization a little bit too late, how hard it had been on my family. I had an opportunity to do something and decided not to do it. And when I did, I told my wife, and she broke down in tears of relief. And I was like shocked, because she's the perfect wife. And she said, even then, she said, look, I said, why? I can't believe you didn't tell me that you felt this way. Like, I've been doing this for like 5 years since I left the military, and, you know, you've never been anything but supportive. She goes, well, I'm not going to have you do it for me. Like I don't want you to look back 20 years from now and say, oh, I could have done these things for my country, because you have this sense of patriotism that's more pathological. And I didn't want you to look back and say, well, you didn't do it because of your wife or because of your kids or whatever. And my son at the time, he's 20 now, and he was, you know, early teens, I guess. And he had the same reaction, you know, to me. I thought he always thought it was cool. Like, he's getting these command coins, and these guys are his uncles and stuff. But what I didn't realize is that in 2011, when our community suffered the losses of Extortion 17, some of those guys were his uncles. And that sense of loss impacted him in ways that I didn't understand until I stopped doing it. So I didn't smoothly transition. I'd love to say I did. I'd love to say I said, oh, hey, I did my part. I did my thing. Let me take my skills like Brian did. But for me, it was more like pulling a Band-Aid off for about 7 years. And so I don't think that I'm a good role model for how that should look. I made decisions to do things that I'm not unproud of the things I did, but I think that I didn't always put my family and their needs first. So my transition was a little messier. Now, meeting Brian was a good thing for me. I was writing supernatural thrillers when I met Brian, and we became very good friends. And after about a year, when we decided that we were going to start co-authoring the series, and the series became a big success, that gave me an opportunity to sort of, you know, do something that maintained a psychological or emotional tie for me. You know, the stuff we write in the Tier 1 series is all about special operators and covert operations, and we write very passionately about putting a mission ahead of yourself, putting your teammates ahead of yourself. I mean, these themes from the life that both of us have led are in these books. And so it made it a little easier for me to slow down and stop doing that stuff, because I had this other outlet through the fiction writing. And so Brian and I going on that journey together, I think, helped me a lot in finally really separating myself from what I had been doing. So my story's a little different.
That's good though. I'm listening to what you were saying, and there's a lot of things that kind of running through my head. One of them was, do you feel like when you were going through all that and that period where like you were talking about, the transition period, like where you kept coming back and doing those things, do you feel like part of that was because two things? One, you feel like because your whole sense of identity was tied into what you did, and then the other part of it is like, did you ever read that book Try by Sebastian Junger?
I did not.
You know, he talks about how, you know, like a big part of, like, you know, men around the world in various aspects, like they you know, not in a glorified way, but almost like they thrive and feel a sense of purpose, like a bigger purpose, you know, in the military. And then also, especially when they're still like, I mean, you know, in America right now, this is like unprecedented. You know, we've been 20, how many years now? Like, it was 2 decades at war, like active wartime, right? In more than one location. And you talk to, you know, many guys that are in the special forces or different aspects of, like, I talked to Tom Pecora, who's in the CIA for 24 years, and the big publicized stuff is Afghanistan and Iraq, but I mean, we're actively with various things going on all over the world, right?
Yeah.
And there's a they have a lot of conversations, talk with guys that have served and are in those situations, and they feel more at home and more at ease because they feel a sense of purpose and contribution to that tribe, to their teammates, to their brothers, over there, versus being back here and almost like you mentioned, like there wasn't that direct purpose of that transition period. Even though it's not diminishing like your wife or your children, right? But it's like that greater sense of purpose of what you can contribute and accomplish, especially for, like you said, you survived. Some of you guys didn't, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you sort of blended two things together that are both correct. One is that sense of purpose, so before now, we've had wars, even long wars, that when they were done, they were done. And you felt like you could come home and move on to the next thing. World War II, what we've done in this conflict is nothing compared to the sacrifices of the greatest generation, for sure. But one thing they did have that we don't is an ending. Yeah. And the sense that, okay, it's okay for me to re-engage my real life, whatever that means. It's okay for me to go start a small business because we won, the war is over. And so that sense of leaving a job that's incomplete to go do something that you want to do, that's a real thing. And your identity does get tied up in that sense of purpose. It's a very big purpose. But you also talked about the commitment to team, and that's a huge one too. There's a guilt that goes on if you leave and you're not on that next deployment and your friends and brothers are. You feel guilty. You're like, well, gosh, if they're still doing it, I should still be doing it. Like, we're not done. Like, I'm not doing my part. And I can remember my wife saying to me, like, I'm just curious, when will enough be enough? Like, when have you done your part and it's somebody else's turn? And I was, at the time, I'm more sympathetic to it now, but at the time I was really irritated by the question. I was like, well, if we all said that, then where would we be? If everybody said, well, I'm not going, then where would we be? That feeling of, if not me, who? Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's a real thing. There's always another group of people that are just as committed and just as patriotic as you are. But it's a real thing psychologically where you feel like, if I don't do it, well, then all of us say that, then we're screwed. But that sense of your teammates are still downrange, you even feel a commitment to teammates that you haven't actually met. Like, just the fact that they're in that community, or that they're in the unit that you were in and they're downrange in the suck. You're like, well, gosh, if they're there, I should be there. And then you realize, I don't even know that guy. Like, feeling this overwhelming sense of, brotherhood with this man that I literally never even met. It's a very strange phenomenon, but it is definitely part of it, for sure.
Well, especially today where you have, unfiltered and 24 hours. I mean, 24 hours isn't even, really kind of hit home on how, especially with your phone and the internet and Twitter and everything else too, and people sending messages and tagging you in a post, you're getting notifications all the time of what's going on. And, there was an attack here, and, this many guys died over here. And every time, probably there's a period there where every time you heard something like that, you're sitting there going, shit, like, I should be there. Or
who is there?
Exactly. Right. So tell me about, so you guys met and decided to team up. How does the process work for, take a hard left in the conversation? How does the process work of putting like co-authoring a book? To me, that's so fascinating when I started reading up on how you guys kind of teamed up and started doing these series that you guys are doing now.
Well, like I said, we're one good writer, right, Brian?
That's right. I think we first of all, you can tell from just talking to us that we're really good friends. So I don't think that you could do this if there wasn't a lot of trust and friendship there. So we have a really good time.
Brutally honest, right?
What's that?
You got to be able to be like brutally honest with each other, right? Like,
you have to be able to be honest, but you also have to be able to just say, you know what? We talk about this a lot. There has to be a lot of trust. So, like, if Jeff says to me, like, I think we need to change this, or I don't like this, or why did you do this? It can't be, about you sort of guarding your prose and like, this turf guarding or, being possessive of the work, that would undermine the process. So the way that, we sort of looked at this from the beginning is, and this is something that I think Jeff really sort of pioneered this paradigm and put it in my head and stuck with me ever since, is that, this is a business, this is a partnership. So our goal is to produce the best book possible. And at the end of the day, that book, that finished product is what we care about. It doesn't matter that, well, he wrote chapter 43 and I wrote chapter 27 and it was his idea to do this thing and it was my idea to do that. That's so much less important than putting together an amazing story that inspires people or transports you to a different universe, and you get in the mind of these characters. And when you finish reading that story, you say, damn, that was a good book. Like, that is what we care about.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's they're for us, and it is different for everybody. We've sat on some panels at different writer conferences with people that don't do it this way. It's, they don't necessarily have the intimacy that we have. But for us, there really is no ego. And that sounds like something you say on a podcast because it sounds cool, but it's really true. Like, there's no sense of ownership. And we're at the point now where even my wife will read something and she'll say, oh yeah, you wrote that part right. And I'll be like, I swear to you, I don't know. I don't know who wrote what. At the end, it's Andrews and Wilson. It's our, Brian uses this analogy that I like a lot about, if you've got 3 kids or 4 kids, it's not like you say, okay, well, these 2 kids are mine and these 2 kids are yours, and let's just do the best you can, right? It's like, no, you bring different things to each child's life, and you partner and you parent as a team. And if you don't, then you're not as effective. And so that's how he said that early on, and that inspired me. It's like, yeah, that's how we should be. It's like the book is the child and we're the parents, and we're just going to work and bring things to the table. And there's no question that there are things that Brian as a writer brings to the table that he's better at. And there might be a few things that I'm as good or better at, whatever, but we have to be able to say there's no ego here. Brian is a little better at XYZ, so I'm going to defer to him. And I think he does that to me. And in the end, because of the way we do it, it is easy to have no ownership because it's such a blended, psychotic process. I mean, we sit at panels and we say, here's how we do it. And all these other writers are like, that's not how you do it. There's no way that will work. That's not possible. But it is for us, and we're very, very effective in doing it. It allows us, as you and I exchange messages ahead of this, I told you we're now have these new contracts, and we've got a couple new book deals. And
yeah, man,
we just signed a contract with Tyndale for a series called The Shepherds, which we're super excited about. We've got a new series launching next June. That's called The Sons of War, which is a spin-off series. We still have Tier 1. There's another announcement we can't make yet, but we're very excited about. So we have this tremendous volume of work that we're doing that seems impossible to do, but it's possible for us to do 3 or 4 books a year like this because of the way we work, because of the system that we have of, complementing each other, never fighting about things. And as a result, we can write a book in 3 or 4 months, which is insane, obviously, but the system lets us do it.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy because you talk to an author that does a series and a successful series. And if they're putting out a book a year, that's almost like it's fast tracked, right? That's pretty quick in the industry standards, right?
Yeah, we have some friends that do a couple books a year, and that's amazing because they're doing it by themselves.
Right.
Brad Taylor, for example, he went through a period where it seemed like he was releasing a book a day. I know I'm exaggerating, obviously, but I mean, he's a very prolific writer. Our friend Mark Greaney is incredible because he's doing his Gray Man series, plus he's writing these other series, and he's putting out a couple books a year. So there are other people that do it. I don't know anyone that does 3 or 4 books a year, but there is 2 of us, so we have that advantage. But having 2 people could slow you down if you're not.
I can see that. If
you're not doing it right. So
yeah, for us, I think that the partnership is a force multiplier. So individually, if I wasn't working with Jeff, I'd probably be back to where I was before, which is writing like 1 book every 7 years. But I mean, what's great about this is, and there's all kinds of metaphors you can use. I like the workout metaphor. If you have a workout partner and you go to the gym together, it's like there's certain days where you might wake up and you say, man, I just don't know if I can do it today. But my buddy's going to be there and I can't let him down, So
right.
You show up, and then, because you show up and he's there, like you might get a better workout that day than you had in a week, just going in, you thought, I don't even know if I can do it. And at the end of the day, it turned out, 10 times better than you thought. And that's sort of the same with us, like every day we're both riding, the ball is moving down the field. So if I'm a little less productive, I mean, Jeff's extremely productive, sometimes embarrassingly so for me, but he's extremely productive.
I'm about volume. He's about quality. That's
and then together you get a decent
balance. Yeah, there you go.
But what's nice is, though, the project is always moving forward. You always feel like there's momentum. And I think the other thing for us is we don't experience writer's block. We have found the cure. Our partnership is the cure for writer's block, because the minute I get stuck, I call Jeff up. I'm like, dude, here's what I'm thinking. I'm not sure. Should I do this? Should I do this? And then we start brainstorming. He's like, oh, that makes me think of this. What if you did this? What if we go this direction? And now suddenly you hang up the phone and you went from feeling demoralized to, oh, this is going to be so cool. And that's the way the story is going to go. And it, like he said before, it might sound like something that we just say on a podcast, but this is our daily life. And it's why I love doing this job. It's why I love working with Jeff, because there is an enthusiasm and like excitement level there every day. We get to tell these stories every day and we do it together. It's really fun.
And being really immature individuals helps a lot too, because that's what we use the word brainstorming because it sounds like a very professional writer word. It's like two kids that are 8 years old in the backyard making up a game of Army. It's like, dude, no. It'd be really cool. I mean, it's nothing professional whatsoever. But, to circle all of that, all of these concepts back to how we started this conversation, we're able to do that because we're military. We're able to do that because we function in an environment where a project isn't more important than your contribution to the project. In the end, the covert submarine gathering ISR somewhere in a water they're not supposed to be in and coming home safely with the whole crew intact and the information, that mission is all that matters, not whether you don't feel up to it that day, not whether you feel well. When you operate in the special operations community, like I had the great honor to do, it's the unit. It's not he did this and you did that. Now there's been some exceptions to that, in the media and books that have been written and stuff like that. But, there's bad apples everywhere. But in general, it is about, putting a mission ahead of yourself and your needs and your desires and everything else. And because we both come from that background, it's very natural for us to say, here's what I'm contributing. Here's the mission. Here's how we'll achieve that mission in the shortest period of time, and we just get to work and we do it. So I think having that teamwork aspect from a military background has made this much more successful than it could have been otherwise, for sure.
Right. I mean, you have to have that ability to have like that collaborative effort. And then what you said there, as far as just goofing off and like having that kind of childlike enthusiasm, I think that's really, really important, because I think that's missing. See, so my background a little bit real fast. I went into fitness. I've been a personal trainer and gym owner for 15 years. I started doing it when I was 25. And then I went, when we sold our gym a few years back with our business partner separated, my wife was pregnant with our fifth. So we were like, okay, do we start another gym now? Like, what do you want to do? And she just looked at me like, can you just go in the corporate world and get like a salary? I don't want to build a fourth gym, because that was our third gym, right? I had 2 personal training studios in California, then sold those and moved up north. But she was like, just like, you have all this ownership experience and management experience. I know you didn't go to college, but like, somebody's going to watch you just from like all your experience, right? So just go in the business world for a little while, corporate world, go get a salary. And I said, okay, cool. So I went and did that for about 2.5 years. And what I found was I learned a lot of stuff, but what I found was there are a lot of people in that industry, just in that corporate environment. I'm sure you guys have run into this, that number one, they're miserable, right? They're absolutely miserable. Like, they're not, if they're being honest, they cannot stand what they do on a day-to-day basis. There's no meaning, there's no purpose. Their day is full of going from, you know, one report and one meeting to another report, another useless meeting, and they have no idea like what the hell they're doing instead of just checking off these boxes every single day, right? And what I did was, somebody who went to work in, you know, a t-shirt and shorts every day for 15 years, was constantly just bring some levity to it. And then also I question things. I was like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we in this meeting? Like, can this be like a note or like email? So I turn around, I'm like, dude, I'm looking right at you. I'm sitting next to you. Why are you sending me an email? You know? My boss actually told me one time, they have no idea what to do with you because you grew up in the corporate environment, right? And I think, and the reason why it made me think of all that is because of what you were saying of this, like this enthusiasm, and it's not having this rigid, you know, structure. Yes, the structure itself in the military is great because it keeps you on task, and then also that the mission is more important than the individual. But at the same time, you guys are, you know, really making sure you have that levity to what you're doing, right? Otherwise, because even writing books, I'm sure you probably run into some guys or some people in the industry where it's like pulling teeth for them, and you know they share like the other end of it. Where, like you said, Jeff, where people look at you going like, "It's not like that. There's no way it's like that for you."
Right. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. That's having the excitement and the enthusiasm. I get, you know, to circle back to something I said earlier, I'm putting to work what my dad challenged me to do. Right. I found a job where I'm getting paid pretty well to do something that I would gladly do for free. And that's the dream. And doing it with Brian makes it 10 times more fun. You know, I've written a number of books by myself, and that's also enjoyable, but not like this because it's lonely. Like, not just the technical stuff, like not having writer's block and, you know, being efficient and effective, but it's more fun to bounce ideas off someone. You know, we're in the middle of a book right now that we'll finish up over the next month or so. And we're talking 4 or 5 times a day when we're in that middle phase of a project. Mm-hmm. And it keeps that excitement going. It keeps the enthusiasm going. You know, you spend 80% of your waking hours in your job. If you wake up every morning and go, I gotta go to that place.
Yeah.
You're screwed. Like, I mean, if you're miserable at what you do, then what a nightmare. Now, obviously, I've taken that to a pathologic level, but because there's nothing wrong with being responsible and earning money and taking care of your family.
Yeah.
But if you can find a way to do it and have this much fun, don't feel guilty. Just do it. Just for sure, just do it.
And I think that enthusiasm and excitement, it definitely carries over into the page. You can tell when you've written something and you're excited about it, you're into it, there is a different level of suspense and creativity and character that flows onto that page. And I think that people pick up on that, you know, and sometimes when you're down or you're not feeling it, you'll go back and read something, you'll say, God, that is so flat, you know, and it's sort of it is a metaphor. I think, Alex, what you were saying, like you actually lifted up. When you were in the corporate world, you were bringing that enthusiasm and excitement and just making life more interesting, right, for the people that you were working with, and so that it shows. No matter what your occupation is, if you have enthusiasm, I think that the finished product and how other people interpret that product or that work, it's at a different level.
That's true. And for, you know, and with you guys, when you're doing that and you're going through the process of writing a book, right, does the process entail, like, I'm sure, you know, now that you guys have written so many books together, does the process entail something where you have like a shared document, or is it like, Brian, you're working on this section, Jeff here, and then you guys kind of get together and collaborate? Or is it like we're on this chapter and you guys both write, and then you kind of get together and just see how can we kind of blend this together? You know?
Yeah. So
it's interesting, like what, like the words that actually end up on paper on the book versus the work being done by 2 different guys, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that there is no one way that works for everybody. There's no right way to do it, but I can tell you what we do that works well for us. And that is that the brainstorming, which is the really fun childlike part for us, is very, very important because it is what allows us to create a world in our shared mind, right? So we have to both see this the same way because unlike some writing teams, we do write simultaneously. So we'll sort of brainstorm a book, just in generic terms. We'll take an entire book, we'll brainstorm basically what it's about. Then we divide it into 3 parts, the classic, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure. And then we'll really brainstorm Act 1 and divide it into, let's say it's the 15 chapters for that part, let's say.
Right.
And then we'll bullet. We don't really outline, at least not like we used to. We used to outline a little bit more, but now that we sort of know each other better, we don't. But we do have, those 15 chapters. It'll say chapter 1, and it'll say Brian, and whose POV he's writing, and sort of a little 1 or 2 sentence reminder of what that chapter is supposed to be. And then we divide those up. So he might be writing chapter 1, 2, 4, 7, 9, and I'm writing the other chapters, and we're writing them simultaneously. But it requires us to communicate and collaborate daily, sometimes multiple times a day. And then once we get let's say every 2 or 3 chapters, we send those to one another and we do rewrites. So every chapter has actually been written by both of us. So I'll write the rough draft of a chapter, and then once we swap them, he takes my 3 chapters and he rewrites them, and I rewrite his, and then they get blended together and put into a master file. And then, of course, the editing is very important. We then come back and do the entire document as developmental editors with an eye towards that, and we divide that up as well. But that's why we're so fast, I think, is because we do write simultaneously, and then rewrite stuff and blend it together. It sounds insanely schizophrenic, like disorganized, but it for us, it just really works.
Well, I think that like that parcel and attack, approach actually works out really well, because I think for whether it's writing or anything else, what ends up stalling a lot of people is that when they hit that wall of the not, I don't want to say monotonous, but like it's the like I'll take, for example, I love podcasting. This is something new for me. I started it 6 months ago, right? And I love doing it, and I've been learning as I go. And I mean, when I say learning, August, I was like, YouTube, how do I record a podcast? You know what I mean? So, but I know myself from my work ethic and everything else too. And I was, and I committed to doing it. But the process of like editing a podcast, and after the first few episodes, I was like, oh my God, this you can get so stuck in the minutia, and just get your wheel stuck in the mud and just keep spinning if you're doing the same thing over and over again. And I could tell, like, if I had a partner or somebody else, and what I would do is every now and then I would just like hand the headphones over to my wife, like, hey, what do you think of this? I would unplug the headphones and say, what do you think of this? And she's like, yeah, that's good, just keep moving. And I realized I was stuck on it, this one part, for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And now if you think about that, that was like a 2-minute clip in a conversation versus, an hour and a half conversation. I'm editing one episode for 10 hours. I mean, that's a total waste of time. I'm not being efficient at all whatsoever, right? So I think what you guys were saying is you do a part, and then he does a part, and then you swap, right? It keeps the, like what Hank Schramm would say, matriculate the ball down the field, right? Like you still keep moving in that direction, right? So that's really interesting.
Yeah, we had this expression on the sub, polishing the cannonball. Like you can sit and polish that cannonball till it's a mere finish, and you have these diminishing marginal returns like after, 10 minutes, right? So you could polish it for 24 hours and it will be a little shinier, but will anybody be able to tell, right? So I think what we've figured out is that, and I think a lot of writers fall into this trap is, and I certainly did when I was writing by myself, which is when you write something, you're like, well, this needs to be perfect before I move on. And now I've sort of done a 180 on that. And I have Jeff to thank for that, which is he's just helped me with this idea that, look, dude, it doesn't have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. We keep going, and we can fix anything that we want later, right? And so he was talking about the editing process. That is a great liberator, right? You can say, okay, we do our first draft, and that's all it is. It's just a first draft. Anything we want to change is fair game. And as we read through it and we talk about it, we'll identify, okay, this scene's pretty cool, but like it could be better if we did this or this, or this doesn't feel right. I don't know why. Let's delete it. Just because we wrote it doesn't mean we have to keep it. Jeff, you should tell that story. We had a funny story when we were working on Sons of War.
Yeah. So I'll tell that in a second, but just you say another thing about what he's saying. You mentioned, Alex, about efficiency in your podcasts. How many times would you spend an hour polishing that 2 minutes, and then when you get to the next 2 minutes, you realize, oh, now I have to change it again because the next 2 minutes changes what I do. And in writing, in writing, that's huge. And that's why efficiency is so stifled by that idea that you're trying to make something perfect. You know, Brian said sometimes we delete a chapter. Imagine if instead of writing that chapter for 2 hours, you wrote it, edited it, wrote it again, edited it, and wrote it again for 15 hours and then deleted it. Man, you'd be hugely depressed. So you've just got to get through to the end, because the end informs the changes you're going to make. And if you do it another way, like you say, it can take 7 years to write a book. But the idea of remembering that you're the creator is really, really important. We had this book we were doing. It's the first book in the Sons of War series that comes out from Blackstone next year. And there was I won't tell the story, but there's this one concept where this early in the book, I think it's like chapter 2 or 3, maybe even chapter 1, this main character does something. Okay. And we wrote in there that he has to be in London to do this thing. And we're in the middle of the book and we're just struggling. It's like, okay, we need to do this. He can't do that because he's got to get back to London. It's like, oh, but the timing isn't going to work. We did this, Alex, no joke, for weeks. We're struggling and changing and modifying timelines. It's like, oh, we want to do that, but we can't because he's got to get back to London. And one of us, I can't even remember which one it was. One day, one of us suddenly just said, well, he only has to get back to London because we said so. Yeah. We could literally just go back and delete a 6-word sentence. Yeah. And we can do whatever we want. And so
nobody's seen the book yet. Nobody's seen yeah.
Right, exactly. And so it's not unique to writing, I'm sure, but you know, that idea that you do something and then you box yourself in by a decision you made before instead of just going back and changing that decision. So we bring that up a lot, I think, not because we think anyone's interested in the story, but we're trying to remind each other, right? Every time we talk, we tell that story. It's like, let's not do that again. Let's not waste a week of work because we're so married to something as if it's the Lord's creation when it's really just Jeff and Brian. Like, we can change it whenever we want. So it was, yeah, that was kind of a funny, eye-opening experience.
It applies to daily life too, though. Right. I bet if you sat down and thought about, okay, what are some of the things we have our own little paradigms and we say, well, I did this, so now I have to do all these other things, with your kids or your parenting or, your house or your job or whatever. And I think if you can go back and say, you know what, like, I made that decision at the time and I said that's how it was going to be, but it's open for revision. I can edit that out. I can change my mind. And this might be something that veterans struggle with a little bit more. You say, well, I said I was going to do this and this way, and so now I have to live with the consequences. And if you can say, you know what, you get new information, situation changes. I think that's empowering to be able to go back and take this writer's metaphor for your own life. You can go back and you can edit things in your past. Just because you said it once or did it once doesn't mean you have to be stuck with it for the rest of your life.
And sometimes we accept other people's paradigms too, right? Like, it's like, well, I'm not going to do that because this is how that's done. Well, who said that's how it's done? When I was a real doctor 100 years ago, for that brief time, I used to work with residents and medical students, and I would have medical students come up to me and say, wow, I'm really fascinated by surgery, but I don't know. I don't think I'm going to do it. It's like, well, I thought you say you love it. You don't want to do it. He goes, yeah, because you have to do this kind of stuff and you have to work these many hours. And, I'm married. We have a baby on the way. I don't want to work 80 to 100 hours a week. It's like, yeah, me either. Like, who said you have to? It's like, well, that's what they do. Well, they do that because they choose to do it or because they've accepted someone else's paradigm. You can say, well, I'm only going to work 40 hours a week. I'm not going to make as much money, or I'm not going to do the complex cases or whatever, but you get to decide what your world looks like and what your life looks like and what your job looks like and what your marriage looks like, what your interaction with your children looks like. Right. No one gets to decide that for you. Accept those paradigms if they make sense to you. Don't just accept them because it's an accepted paradigm from somebody else.
Yeah, you get so tied to ideas and this whole concept of, like, to steal a military term, you get so decisively engaged in this little thing, like right here, you can't see the big picture and kind of step back. And I found myself doing that a few times, bringing that up actually, in that, middle management, that corporate environment where everybody would be talking in circles and stuck to this one thing. And like, Brian, like what you were saying, where this idea that they created and boxed themselves into, and then I'm like, well, why are we doing it this way? And then everybody was like, wait, what? Like, oh, why are we doing it this way? Why can't we just do that instead? This seems pretty simple. How come we can't just go, well, that's the way we've always done it? I'm like, well, that sounds really stupid. No, as a reason why you would just keep doing it over and over again. Like, well, have we tried this way or that way? And a lot of it had to do with, it had to do with managing a group of individuals that were usually more tenured than the management themselves, because you have like a union workforce and a non-union management. So you had a high turnover in management, and it turned into this like us against them mentality. And I came in and said, like, well, these guys obviously want to do the job. They're getting paid pretty well. They have everything else too. They hate you. So like, why don't we just address why they hate you? Like, you being like management as general, right? Why don't we just figure out like, okay, what makes that guy tick? Like, I'm sure, okay, he's married, he's got kids. Let's figure that out. Let's build relationships. And everybody looked at me like I was speaking Chinese, right? And no, you just tell them what to do. I'm like, that's great. Then it doesn't work, right? And so everybody had such a hard time stepping back and kind of getting out of that whole, like you said, married to this idea that they created, right? It's not in stone. You can change your environment. And again, that happens in the careers you pick, the jobs you pick. I have to do this job. Why? Well, because that's what I went to school for. Yeah, but do you like it? No, you can still work in that field. Why don't you go find something that's better suited for number one, what you enjoy, gives you more of a sense of purpose. You feel like you actually bring some value to the situation, both for yourself and everybody else that's involved. And yeah, it's pretty interesting the way you brought that up, man. I like that.
Well, it's a leadership principle too, right, Alex? I mean, there's a misconception in the military and in corporate America and everywhere else that leadership is telling people what to do, which is
right.
Right? Leadership is not telling people what to do. Anybody can do that. You could write that on a piece of paper and thumbtack it to the wall. Leadership is helping people understand why it's important to do things and to do them in a certain way and to motivate them to want to do their best job. That's leadership. And too many leaders don't understand that. And that's true in the military as well. Too many leaders think giving an order is leadership. No, leadership is having people say, I want to do what that guy says because he inspires me. And that's why in special warfare, these guys lead from the front. You've got 04s, 05s taking their turn running, they're calling out names on the stick and their name is on that stick because it's a high value operation. And leading from the front is everything. It's not just telling people what to do. Definitely a good universal principle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, guys, I've already stolen an hour of your time, and
went by fast, Alex. It was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, man. And like my wife says, if it's up to me, I just keep on talking. So
now you know what it's like to be part of one of our joint sessions. See, an hour goes by like that, right?
I love it, man. This is great. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I got into podcasting. Like I said, and again, this whole concept of being able to pivot and do what you want to do and find some joy. I love talking to people. If it was up to me, I'd just be, I'd have a beer and be sharing stories all the time. It's like what I love to do, right? I love getting to know people, what makes them tick. Even in the corporate world, when you get to know somebody and what do you like to do? I love photography. Well, so you don't like HR? No, God, no. I'm like, well, what is photography? And they go, well, I can't do that. Why? Because I had this job. I said, well, do you follow photographers on Instagram? I do. I'm like, do you know professional photographers? I do. I'm like, so do you think they're special, or that's a person who just went that route? You have a phone, you have an Instagram account, start taking pictures, putting them up there, start getting a following, build it up, and then just start like I would give them this whole content, and they just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. And it was frustrating and sad, but at the same time, I was like, okay, that's what separates some people from another, and the individuals.
That's true. That's true. And sometimes it just takes that little outside push, right? Like you're that spark that might be open their eyes. You just changed a paradigm. Maybe that it's just never occurred to them that they could take that step. So that's kind of cool, right? Right.
It is. So, okay. So what's the next book in the series that's coming out right now?
We got a book 6 in the Tier 1 series comes out in September 1st, called Collateral. It's actually available already for pre-order on Amazon. And then we got them coming out kind of one after another. And 2021 is going to be a busy year. We've got first book in the Sons of War series called Sons of War comes out next June. In September, the first book in the Shepherd series comes out. We have Dempsey, which is book 7 in tier 1. There's so much going on. The best way to follow it is just go to the website. It's andrews-wilson.com, and we update that frequently and keep our readers in the loop as to what's going on. But the next one, Collateral, coming soon.
Very cool. I think we got through a whole podcast without talking about the zombie apocalypse. So
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. Has anything, as far as what's going on now, affected you guys as far as what you're doing? But since as far as release dates or anything of that nature at all, or like you guys?
It's a little harder to be productive with all my children doing school from home, but other than that, it's all still on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, guys, Brian, Jeff, man, thank you so much. Thanks for the time. And I had a blast learning about this, and hopefully have you guys back on soon and continue the conversation.
Sounds great. We talk to you anytime, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. We had a great time.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. God bless you guys. Take care.
You too.